Most medieval soldiers did not fall in battle. They did not die in heroic charges or dramatic final moments. Most of them spent their days waiting for orders, waiting for supplies, waiting for something to happen, or hoping that nothing would. When we imagine medieval war, we think of noise and movement. But the reality was quieter, slower, and far more ordinary. Long before swords were drawn, life unfolded inside camps where nothing seemed to happen, yet everything was at stake. Tonight, we're stepping into that forgotten space, not the battlefield itself, but the place just before it, where armies stopped, rested, and endured. This is not a story about glory or conquest. It's a calm journey into daily life, routine, and uncertainty inside a medieval war camp. You don't need to concentrate. You don't need to stay awake. Just listen and let the camp slowly come into view. And as the army finally stops moving, we arrive at the beginning, the moment the camp is formed. A medieval war camp did not appear suddenly. It formed slowly, at the moment an army finally stopped moving. After days, sometimes weeks, of marching, this was where the road ended, at least for a while. Soldiers arrived tired, their bodies sore from carrying heavy gear, mile after mile. Armor felt heavier than it had at the start of the journey. Packs were lowered to the ground, with quiet relief. Horses stood still, breathing slowly, steam rising from their bodies in the cool air. There was no celebration, no sense of victory. Reaching the camp did not mean safety. It simply meant the march was over for the day. The place itself was chosen with care, though rarely for comfort. Commanders looked for ground that offered small advantages, a slight rise, a nearby stream, land that could be defended if needed. It didn't have to be perfect. It only had to be good enough. Once the army stopped, the camp took shape little by little. Tents were raised, uneven and worn from use. Small fires appeared, kept low and practical. Thin smoke drifted upward and blended with the mist. No one shouted orders. Everyone already knew what to do. The ground quickly changed under countless footsteps. What had been grass or dirt turned soft and muddy. The air filled with the smell of damp cloth, leather, smoke, and unwashed bodies. This was not a place of stories or songs. It was a place of waiting. Weapons were never far away. Spears leaned against carts. Shields rested nearby. Swords stayed within reach, even during rest. A medieval camp could feel calm, but it was never relaxed. Awareness was constant. Along the edges of the camp, guards stood quietly, watching the horizon. Their task was simple: notice movement, sound, anything out of place. Most of the time, nothing happened. And that, too, was part of the war. As evening approached, the camp grew quieter. Conversations dropped to murmurs. Some men repaired straps or checked their gear. Others simply sat still, conserving energy. Food was simple and limited: bread, thin stew, whatever could be spared. Hunger was familiar. As daylight faded, small fires became points of warmth in the dark. Faces appeared and disappeared in the soft light. These were not heroic faces. They were tired ones, shaped by routine and uncertainty. This was life before battle. Long hours of waiting, with nothing to do but prepare and endure. And as night settled over the camp, one thought quietly lingered among them all. The hardest part of war was often the waiting. Arriving at the camp did not bring relief the way one might expect. The march had ended, yes, but something else had begun. A different kind of weight settled over the soldiers, quieter, heavier, harder to define. There was a strange stillness after movement stopped. Muscles that had worked for days now rested, but the mind did not. Thoughts moved slowly, drifting without direction. Some men felt uneasy without the rhythm of marching to occupy their attention. The camp felt temporary, even as it grew more solid by the hour. Everyone knew this place was not home. It was a pause, a place that existed only because the war demanded it. For many soldiers, this moment, the first full day inside the camp, was when the reality of war truly settled in, not through fear, but through awareness. The understanding that time would stretch, that days would repeat, that waiting would become routine. And as the camp moved from arrival into daily rhythm, life began to organize itself around repetition. Once the camp was fully formed, life settled into a slow and repetitive rhythm. Days did not feel important on their own. They blended together, marked less by dates and more by routine. Most mornings began quietly. There were no horns, no dramatic calls to rise. Men woke as the light slowly changed, feeling the cold first, then the stiffness in their bodies. Some stretched carefully. Others sat still for a moment, gathering energy before standing. Simple tasks filled the day. Equipment needed constant attention. Leather straps loosened. Metal fittings wore down. Boots cracked from moisture and long use. Soldiers spent hours fixing small problems, knowing that a single failure could matter later. Guards changed positions along the edges of the camp. Watching became a habit, almost automatic. Most days, nothing happened. The horizon stayed empty. The silence remained unbroken. Still, eyes stayed alert. War was unpredictable, and calm never meant safety. Food was prepared slowly and without ceremony. Fires stayed small. Meals were modest and repetitive. Bread, thin broth, sometimes a small portion of meat if supplies allowed. Eating was not a moment of pleasure. It was simply maintenance. Between tasks, there was waiting. Long stretches of it. Some men talked quietly, sharing stories from home or repeating old rumors. Others preferred silence. Boredom was common, but it was accepted as part of the experience. Time moved differently inside a war camp. Without clear events to mark the day, hours seemed longer. The mind wandered. Thoughts drifted between the past and an uncertain future. Many soldiers learned to focus only on the present moment. As afternoon passed, fatigue returned. Not the sharp exhaustion of marching, but a deep, constant tiredness. Bodies adjusted to the rhythm, conserving strength without realizing it. Life in the camp was not dramatic. It was steady, predictable. And for many soldiers, this routine defined war far more than any battle ever would. And as evening approached once again, the camp quietly prepared for another night, knowing tomorrow would likely feel very much the same. Time inside a medieval war camp did not move the way it did elsewhere. Without travel or battle to mark the hours, days became difficult to separate from one another. Morning felt much like the afternoon. Afternoon faded quietly into evening. There were no clocks, no clear signals, only light changing slowly in the sky. Soldiers learned to measure time through habit. Guard shifts, meals, the gradual dimming of fires, the return of cold at night. These small patterns replaced calendars. Waiting stretched moments longer than they should have felt. A single afternoon could feel endless. Yet weeks passed quickly when looking back. This uneven sense of time was something nearly everyone experienced. As daylight slowly disappeared once again, the camp prepared to enter another night. Night changed the camp in quiet ways. Sound softened, movement slowed. The world seemed to pull inward. As darkness settled, fires were kept low. Their light flickered gently, never bright enough to be seen from far away. Shadows moved slowly across tents and carts, stretching and fading as the flames shifted. The camp felt smaller at night, more enclosed. Most soldiers stayed close to their resting places. Talking became rare and subdued. Voices dropped instinctively, as if the darkness itself demanded silence. Words, when spoken, were brief and careful. Some men prayed quietly. Others stared into the fire without thinking. A few shared stories in low tones. Not heroic tales, but memories of home, familiar places, ordinary moments. These conversations rarely lasted long. Fatigue always returned. Guards remained awake along the edges of the camp. They listened more than they watched. Every sound stood out. The wind moving through fabric, distant animals, the crack of wood in a fire. Most nights passed without incident, but the possibility of danger was always present. Sleep came unevenly. Some soldiers fell asleep quickly, bodies giving in to exhaustion. Others lay awake, thoughts drifting. The mind wandered easily at night. Worries felt heavier. Time seemed slower. The ground was cold and uncomfortable. Blankets offered limited warmth. Armor was loosened, but never fully removed. Even in rest, readiness mattered. Above the camp, the sky stretched wide and indifferent. Clouds moved slowly. Stars appeared and disappeared. The world beyond the firelight felt distant and quiet, as if the war itself had paused. For many soldiers, the night was the hardest part. Not because of fear alone, but because of reflection. In darkness, there were no distractions, only thoughts, memories, and the uncertainty of what tomorrow might bring. And as the camp settled into stillness, the night continued its slow passage. Calm on the surface, heavy beneath. Sleep in the camp was rarely deep. Even when exhaustion pulled the body down, the mind often stayed alert. Small sounds were enough to stir someone awake. Some men slept in short stretches, waking often without knowing why. Others drifted between sleep and thought, half aware of their surroundings. True rest was rare. Dreams came easily but faded quickly. Familiar places appeared, then disappeared. Morning arrived quietly, without announcement. When soldiers rose again, they carried the weight of incomplete rest with them. Another layer of fatigue added to the last, and over time, this lack of rest began to shape everything else. Over time, the camp began to wear down the people inside it. Not suddenly, and not in obvious ways. The strain came slowly, settling into bodies and minds little by little. Food was rarely enough. Supplies were stretched carefully, but hunger was constant. Meals filled the stomach just enough to keep going. No one expected to feel satisfied. Eating was about survival, not comfort. Water was another quiet concern. Streams and wells were not always clean. Illness spread easily in crowded camps, especially when rain turned the ground to mud. Small wounds became serious. Coughs lingered. Fevers appeared without warning. There were no healers for everyone. Care was basic and limited. Most soldiers relied on rest, simple remedies, and time. Some recovered. Others did not. A man who could not stand or march quickly became a burden, not because others lacked compassion, but because resources were scarce. Fatigue settled deep into the body. It was different from the tiredness of marching. This was a constant heaviness, a sense of being worn thin. Sleep helped, but never fully restored strength. Morale changed slowly. At first, men endured with patience. Over time, small frustrations grew larger. Minor discomforts felt heavier. Silence became more common. Laughter faded. Despite this, the camp continued to function. Guards stood watch. Tasks were completed. Routine carried everyone forward, even when energy was low. This quiet persistence was what kept armies together. War was not only fought with weapons, it was fought against hunger, illness, and exhaustion. Day after day, often without relief. And as the strain continued to build, another truth became clear. Most armies were weakened long before they ever faced an enemy. The weakening of an army rarely looked dramatic. It happened in small ways that were easy to overlook. A man moved more slowly than before. Another stopped speaking as much. Someone missed a guard shift or needed help standing. None of this felt like collapse. It felt like erosion. The camp still functioned. Tasks were done. Orders followed. But the energy behind these actions slowly drained away. By the time commanders noticed the change, it had often already gone too far to reverse. And still, the waiting continued. As days turned into weeks, waiting became the defining feature of life in the war camp. Not waiting for battle exactly, but waiting for change, for movement, for orders, for an end to uncertainty. Many battles never happened. Armies faced each other across distance, neither side willing to risk open combat. Commanders understood the danger of fighting without advantage. Sometimes, the smartest decision was to do nothing at all. So the camp remained. Tents stayed in place. Fires burned low. Guards watched the same horizons day after day. The landscape became familiar, almost ordinary, even as tension lingered beneath the surface. Time felt stretched. Without clear events, days blended together. Soldiers marked time by routines rather than dates. The same meals, the same watches, the same paths walked through the camp. Rumors circulated quietly, whispers of enemy movement, stories of reinforcements that might arrive. News traveled slowly and was rarely certain. Most of it faded without consequence. For many, the waiting was harder than fighting. There was no release of energy, no clear purpose in the moment. Only patience, discipline, and endurance. Men learned to live inside this suspended state, neither fully at rest nor fully engaged. Eventually, armies moved on, sometimes toward battle, sometimes away from it, and sometimes the war ended without the camp ever seeing combat. What remained was the memory of time spent waiting, a reminder that medieval warfare was shaped as much by stillness as by action. And in that quiet truth, the camp slowly faded back into the landscape, leaving little behind but traces in the ground and stories carried by those who survived. Perhaps the most difficult truth about medieval warfare is how often nothing happened at all. No battles, no movement, no clear outcome. Armies waited. Camps remained. Seasons changed. Some soldiers would leave without ever fighting. Others would carry the memory of waiting longer than any memory of combat. War, for them, was not a series of dramatic moments. It was a long stretch of ordinary days lived under extraordinary tension. And when the camp finally disappeared, either through movement or dissolution, what remained was not a story of glory, but one of endurance. Most medieval wars were not decided by dramatic moments. They were shaped by patience, routine, and endurance. If you've been listening quietly, letting this world unfold in the background, then you've experienced something close to how war was actually lived, not as spectacle, but as time passing slowly. Thank you for spending this moment with Lines of History. If you'd like to continue exploring the quieter side of the past, you're welcome to stay. And for now, let the camp rest.